Hello, how are you? Good. I was talking to some friends the other day, and they said they thought it would be a nice idea if we recorded some old fairy stories. I said I thought it was a nice idea too, but which stories? There are so many of them from so many countries, and we wouldn't have time to record them all. So then we thought it would be a good idea to tell fairy stories from Britain. So that's what we're going to do. You'll hear stories from England, Ireland, Scotland and Wales. Perhaps there'll be new stories to you. They were to me. By the way, I'm afraid that every now and then I might be interrupted by a man I know who keeps trying to tell me what he thinks are the latest jokes. Actually, his jokes are even older than the fairy stories, but I don't want to hurt his feelings, so we'd better listen. But let's start with the stories. Here's one, a very old one, called The King, the Saint and the Goose. Long, long ago, in Ireland, it was probably longer ago in Ireland than it was in England. They seem to measure time differently there. Anyway, long, long ago, in Ireland, there was a King O'Toole. Now, when King O'Toole was a young man, he was a very active and lively character, always in the thick of things, playing football, doing the high jump, dancing, swimming, and best of all, hunting. When he wasn't doing all those other things, he was out with his horse and hounds, galloping and hallooing first thing in the morning, and galloping and goodbying last thing at night. But even in Ireland, where time passes so slowly, it still passes. And eventually King O'Toole found himself getting just a bit past it. His goal average dropped. He couldn't jump more than about 2'6". His feet couldn't keep up with the latest dance steps. He found the water too cold for swimming, and worst of all, he had to give up his beloved hunting. He became too stiff and creaky to enjoy sitting on a horse all day. In fact, he began to have difficulty even in walking about without the aid of a stick. So, one way and another, King O'Toole was feeling a bit low in spirits, and he decided that if he was going to get any pleasure at all out of life, he'd better get a pet or a companion of some sort to amuse and interest him. Now, although Ireland is not the largest country in the world, and not one of the richest either, the king wasn't hard up. He could choose anything he wanted. The world, as they say, was his oyster. But he wasn't very fond of oysters, and he looked around for something else to amuse him. And he decided upon, believe it or not, a goose. Now, why a goose I can't explain. This is a very old story, and the reason was forgotten a long time ago. But he was, after all, the king, and kings in those days did whatever they wanted, however strange. And it turned out to be a very happy choice, because that goose gave King O'Toole a lot of happiness. Oddly enough, the goose is the only person in this story who doesn't have a name. At least she didn't have a name when I first heard the story. But if you're the kind of person who needs to know everyone's name, then I'll think of one. Let's call her Bridget. It's a nice Irish name, and she was certainly a nice Irish goose. Right then. Bridget was the apple, so to speak, of the king's eye. She flew round and round, doing loops and circles and dives. She always came when she was called, and she followed him everywhere. They made a funny pair, King O'Toole tottering along with his stick, with Bridget waddling behind. Every Friday, because no one ate meat on that day, she used to swim out into the lake and bring him back 1 or 2 juicy trout for his dinner. I suppose it was just as well that he hadn't decided to make the trout his pets. But all good things come to an end, and the happy times that Bridget and King O'Toole had had together came to an end when Bridget, too, became too old to do her tricks. Not only couldn't she fly around like she used to, but she couldn't even get a run-up to launch herself, even if she had been able to fly. So life, once again, was a dull affair for King O'Toole. One day the two of them were sitting sadly by the lake, with not a leg, arm or wing in working order. Really, thought King O'Toole, life just doesn't seem worth living for either of us. A tear trickled down his cheek. Bridget gave a sigh and waddled painfully off to look for something to eat. As the king sat there thinking about the good old days, A shadow fell over his feet. He looked up.
God bless all here, King O'Toole, sir,
said the owner of the shadow.
Hello there, said King O'Toole. And who might you be? One of the new gardeners?
Not at all, said the stranger, who seemed a decent young fellow. I just happened to be passing by. Tell me, your kingship, and how is Bridget?
Now, how on earth did you know about her?
Said the king.
There's quite a lot I know about, sir, said the stranger with a mysterious smile. But how is the old goose? She's as well as can be expected, said the king, bearing in mind that she can hardly put one foot in front of the other, bless her feathers.
I think I might be able to help you, king, said the stranger.
Is that right? Said King O'Toole. And what might you be, an animal doctor?
Oh, no, said the stranger.
Well, then, you'd need to be some kind of magician to help poor old Bridget, said the king. I'm afraid she's past it. You could do nothing for her.
I wouldn't be too sure, said the young man. Let me put it this way, sir. I'm a sort of specialist. I make old things as good as new.
Is that right? Said the king again, with a smile. And you think you can do something for poor old Bridget, do you? What are you going to do? Put wheels underneath her?
Not quite, your majesty, said the stranger. But I think I can do even better than that. Where is she, sir?
She's off looking for a spot of food, said the king. I'll give a little whistle now.
Out of the reeds limped Bridget, and slowly they watched her painful progress.
Oh, yes, said the young man. I think I can solve all your problems. If you can do that, young man, said King O'Toole, you're a cleverer man than all the O'Tooles put together, and that's very clever indeed, bedad.
Oh, one thing, sir. When I've done what must be done, and your bird is as good for me, said the king, will you give me all the land that Bridget flies over when I've fixed her wings?
A bargain, said the king. I don't think you'll be able to do anything, mind you, but if you can get dear Bridget up in the air again, with her old wings flapping away as good as new, I'll willingly agree to give you the land.
Right, sir, said the young man, and he turned to Bridget.
Come here, me darling, he said. Come here to me. I'll soon make you better than you ever used to be.
He took her by the wings, made the sign of the cross over her, and threw her into the air. As he threw her, he blew on her feathers to give them a ripple of air, to remind her of how it used to feel when her wings worked properly. And, believe it or not, after a few flutters and a bit of a struggle, old Bridget pointed her beak at the far horizon and was off like a jet plane. Over the mountains she flew, far away and out of sight, swooping, sailing, and somersaulting with excitement and delight. As for King O'Toole, he just stood there with his mouth and eyes wide open, watching the caperings of his beloved goose. When at last she glided down out of the sky and landed beside him, it was quite obvious that she was a completely new bird. She fairly shook with life and vitality, and almost purred with pleasure as her master stroked her long neck.
Well, by all that's wonderful, cried the king. You've done it, young man, you've done it. You're a cleverer man than all the O'Tooles put together, and the O'Mulligans too, for that matter.
And didn't I say I would do it, said the young man. Now, you wouldn't be forgetting what you promised, would you?
No, I'll be grateful to you for the rest of me life, lad, said the king.
And you'll give me the land that Bridget flew over?
I will that. I always keep a promise, and I wouldn't care if you took the last inch of ground in me whole kingdom.
That's a decent man you are, said the stranger, and I'm glad that you've passed your test.
Passed me what? What do you mean? Who are you, laddie?
The king asked again, and he began to feel a little afraid. I'm St. Kevin, said the young man.
Saints preserve us,
gasped the king, and that, of course, was the right thing to say. That's just what we're going to do, smiled St. Kevin. I came here in disguise to find out if you were a decent old soul, and indeed you are. You've kept your bargain. And so it was. The king had his dear old goose as good as new again, and although he only had a little bit of his kingdom left, the pair of them were perfectly happy, and St. Kevin looked after them for the rest of their lives. And this, so the story goes, explains why a certain part of Ireland belongs to this very day to one of the saints of heaven.